The unlikely protector. The sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting a soft glow over the city as the first signs of nightfall began to creep in. For most people in the bustling metropolis, it was just another evening, the streets filled with people heading home after a long day. But that night, something was different. Something was coming. In the skies above, a massive shadow appeared. It was unlike any aircraft humanity had ever seen. The craft was large, its sleek, metallic surface shimmering under the last rays of the sun. As it glided closer, a low hum filled the air, making the very ground beneath their feet tremble. People stopped in their tracks, staring up in awe and fear. The ship was silent, but its presence spoke louder than any words ever could. On the ground, Jack Thompson, a seasoned soldier, was on his way home after a long day of training exercises. He had seen his fair share of strange things in his life, but this was something else. He looked up, his military instincts kicking in. The first thing he noticed was how different the ship looked. No wings, no engines that could be identified. It hovered suspended in the air with eerie stillness. People around him began to panic. Cars screeched to a halt, and pedestrians scattered, some running toward their homes, others simply standing frozen, unsure of what to do. Jack's grip on the strap of his bag tightened. His mind was racing, calculating the situation, but there was no clear answer. Whatever this was, it wasn't anything he had trained for. As the ship descended, the air seemed to charge with energy. Jack's body instinctively tensed, his fingers flexing at his sides. He had seen enough to know that when things like this happened, they usually didn't end well. But then, something strange happened. A beam of light shot down from the ship, landing softly on the ground in the middle of the street. The people around him gasped, backing away in fear, but Jack stood his ground. There was something different about this. He could feel it in his bones. The light slowly dimmed, and through the soft glow, a figure emerged. At first, Jack thought it was a hologram or some kind of projection, but the figure became clearer, and the reality of the situation hit him. It wasn't a human, but it was real. A young alien girl stood in front of him, her small form bathed in the fading light of the ship. She had soft, glowing blue skin, her long white hair flowing like liquid silk behind her. Her eyes, larger than human eyes, were the most striking feature, glowing with an otherworldly intensity, a mixture of curiosity and fear. She looked fragile, her small body shivering slightly as if the atmosphere of Earth was unfamiliar to her. But there was strength in the way she stood, as though she knew she had a purpose here. Jack's mind raced. He had been trained to react in hostile situations, but this was different. The girl didn't look dangerous. She looked lost, and she needed help. Before he could take a step forward, a loud, piercing sound filled the air. The ground beneath him shook again, this time much more violently. The alien ship above them seemed to have shifted in position, and another beam of light shot from the ship, this time aimed at the ground near the girl. The energy from the beam struck the pavement, causing it to crack and splinter. The girl flinched, stepping back, her body tense. The sound of a loud explosion followed, sending shockwaves through the air. Jack's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he rushed toward the girl, throwing himself in front of her. The blast rocked the street, debris flying through the air. He felt the heat of the explosion on his back, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was keeping her safe. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. She didn't speak, but Jack could sense her fear. She didn't know where she was or what was happening, but she trusted him. That trust, so pure and unspoken, weighed heavily on him. She needed him, and for some reason, he couldn't turn away. The air around them crackled as another explosion shook the ground. Jack pulled the girl close, shielding her from the falling debris. The chaos was overwhelming. People were screaming, running for their lives. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Jack's focus was entirely on the girl in his arms. "Stay close," he muttered, his voice calm despite the storm of chaos around them. He glanced around, trying to think of a plan. There was no time to call for backup. He was on his own, and it was up to him to protect her. The street was filled with smoke, and the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Jack knew the authorities would be here soon, but that might not be soon enough. The girl needed to be moved, and fast. "Come on," he said, gently urging her to move with him. "We have to go." The girl hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if trying to make sense of what was happening. She then looked back at Jack, her expression softening, and slowly began to follow him. As they ran, Jack's thoughts were a whirlwind. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what did this ship want with Earth? The questions raced through his mind, but there were no answers. All he knew was that he had to keep her alive. They reached an alley, the sounds of destruction still echoing in the distance. Jack ducked into the shadows, trying to keep out of sight. He didn't know who else might be looking for the girl, or if there were others like her, but he couldn't afford to take any chances. The girl was silent now, her small form pressed close to his side. He could feel her trembling slightly, but it wasn't just fear, it was something else, something Jack couldn't quite place. The more he looked at her, the more questions filled his mind. But for now, those questions would have to wait. The world outside was a blur of destruction and chaos, but in this alley, it was just the two of them, Jack and the alien girl. And as he stood there, trying to catch his breath, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The reluctant bond. The sound of distant sirens grew louder as Jack crouched deeper into the shadows, his back pressed against the cold brick of the alley. The girl, still close to him, clutched at the sleeve of his jacket with surprising strength. Jack couldn't help but notice how delicate her hands were, her fingers almost translucent in the dim light. Despite the chaos outside, the alley was quiet. It was almost as if the world had paused just for them. Jack's breath was steady, but his mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in an instant. A few minutes ago, he had been just another soldier, going through his day, expecting nothing more than routine. Now, he was caught in the middle of something much bigger than he could understand. "Are you all right?" Jack's voice was softer now, trying to comfort her without pushing too hard. The girl looked up at him with those glowing eyes. She didn't say anything, just nodded, but Jack could see the fear still there. It was clear that she didn't fully understand what was happening either, but there was something else there too, a quiet strength. Jack had seen it before in soldiers, that silent resolve when everything seemed lost. It was the kind of strength that didn't come from muscle, but from deep within. This girl had it, even though she didn't look like she could hurt a fly. They couldn't stay here for long. Jack knew the authorities would be closing in soon, and they needed to move. He had no idea where they would go or what they would do when they got there, but for now, all he could focus on was keeping her safe. Jack stood up, motioning for the girl to follow. "We need to move," he said, keeping his voice low. She hesitated for a moment before nodding and silently following his lead. The two of them crept down the alley, staying in the shadows as much as possible. The air outside was thick with smoke, and the smell of burning rubber and fuel filled Jack's nostrils. He could still hear the explosions in the distance, the sounds of destruction echoing through the city. Whatever had caused the attack, it wasn't over yet. They reached the end of the alley and paused, peeking around the corner. Jack's military training kicked in, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. The street was empty for now, but that wouldn't last long. He had no idea what was going on, but he wasn't going to take any chances. Jack turned to the girl, who was now standing a few steps behind him, her wide eyes staring out into the chaos. She was smaller than him, but she had an air of quiet determination about her. Jack had seen this before in people who were used to fighting their own battles, even if they weren't fully aware of it yet. "We need to get to a safer place," Jack said, his voice steady but urgent. "Stay close to me." She nodded again, her glowing eyes never leaving him. Jack couldn't help but feel a connection with her, a bond that didn't need words. It was as if, in that moment, their fates were intertwined. As they moved through the streets, Jack kept his head on a swivel, his hand instinctively resting on the gun at his side. He wasn't expecting any immediate danger, but that didn't mean it wouldn't come. The entire world felt like it was on edge, and Jack wasn't about to let his guard down. They reached a small park, the open space offering a brief moment of peace amidst the chaos. Jack motioned for the girl to sit on a bench, his eyes still scanning the area. He needed to think. They couldn't keep running forever. He needed a plan, something that would give them both a fighting chance. "Stay here," Jack said, looking back at her. She gave a small nod, her eyes following him as he moved to a nearby payphone. He hesitated for a moment, then picked up the receiver. The world outside was a mess, but Jack needed to know what was going on. He dialed a number for his commanding officer, hoping to get some answers. The phone rang twice before a voice on the other end picked up. Thompson. It was his commander, sounding as serious as ever. "Sir, what the hell is happening?" Jack's voice was urgent. "There's an alien ship, and I've got one of them here. She's injured, and I need orders." There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation before the commander spoke. "Hold tight, Thompson. We've got teams in the area. Just stay put and keep the alien alive. We'll send help." Jack clenched his jaw. He didn't like the sound of that. Stay put. He wasn't about to wait around while the world fell apart. The commander's voice was already fading out as he continued. "Jack, stay." The line went dead. Jack slammed the receiver down, frustration bubbling up inside him. There was no way he was waiting around. Not when she needed him. He returned to the bench where the girl was sitting. Her eyes were still focused on him, studying him as if she were trying to figure him out. He took a deep breath, pushing away his thoughts. "We need to move again," Jack said quietly, crouching beside her. "Stay close, and no matter what happens, do not leave my side." The girl nodded once more, her trust in him absolute. They began walking again, heading deeper into the city. The streets were quieter now, the chaos fading into the background as they moved through the quieter parts of town. Jack kept his eyes peeled for any sign of danger, but it felt like the calm before the storm. As they walked, Jack couldn't help but think about how different things were now. The world had been normal just a few hours ago, and now everything was changing. He glanced at the girl beside him, wondering where she had come from and what she meant for the future. But in that moment, he didn't need to have all the answers. All he knew was that he had to protect her, and, in doing so, protect the world. Because whatever was coming, it was clear that humanity was about to face a new kind of enemy. And Jack, the unlikely protector, was going to be at the center of it all. The streets were eerily quiet now. The sirens had grown distant, replaced by the hum of scattered drones buzzing overhead. Jack and the girl moved cautiously through the city's abandoned downtown, each step feeling more uncertain than the last. The atmosphere felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Jack could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him, but he kept his focus sharp, scanning their surroundings as they passed through alleys and hidden streets. As they reached a more secluded part of the city, Jack finally allowed himself a moment of quiet. His body was tired. He hadn't slept in days, but there was no time for rest. The girl beside him moved silently, her delicate features marked by a mix of fear and curiosity. The way she seemed to take in everything around her, from the ruins of buildings to the eerie silence of a once bustling city, made Jack wonder just how much she truly understood. "We need to find shelter," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "Somewhere we can lay low until we figure out what's going on." The girl nodded, but her gaze remained distant. She didn't speak, but Jack sensed she was still processing everything that had happened in the last few hours. The alien ship had crashed not far from the city's edge, and everything had changed since. The government had gone silent, and the military's presence was everywhere, but it was unclear if they were there to help or to control. Jack had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and right now, something didn't feel right. Every move they made seemed to draw unwanted attention. Maybe it was just his paranoia kicking in, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was watching them. They turned a corner, and that's when it hit him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a chill running down his spine. The girl beside him froze. Jack looked over at her, his heart racing as he saw the look in her eyes. It was a kind of fear he hadn't seen before, not in anyone he knew. "We're being followed," Jack muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't need to turn around to know it. There was something in the air, a change in the way the wind felt, an unnatural stillness that settled around them. Jack's instincts told him to move, to run, but he wasn't sure if it was the right call. They were trapped in the heart of a city that was slowly becoming a battleground, and every decision felt like a gamble. But he wasn't about to make the wrong choice now. "Stay close," Jack ordered softly, gripping his gun tightly as they moved toward a nearby building. They had to take shelter, and fast. The girl nodded again, her footsteps almost silent as she followed him into the building. They crept through the darkened hallways, the only light coming from the distant glow of emergency lights above. As they moved deeper into the building, Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down harder. Whatever was hunting them, whatever force was out there, it wasn't going to stop, and that thought gnawed at him with every passing moment. Inside, the building was abandoned, empty except for the occasional overturned chair or broken piece of furniture. It felt like a ghost town, silent, forgotten, just like the city outside. Jack found a small room near the back of the building, a cramped space that offered a modicum of protection. He motioned for the girl to follow him inside, his senses on high alert. "We'll wait here," Jack said, moving quickly to secure the door behind them. He didn't know what was out there, but he knew he couldn't afford to take any risks. His hand hovered over his gun as he kept an ear out for any sounds of movement. As the minutes passed, Jack's mind raced. Was it possible that the alien forces, whoever they were, had sent something after them? Or was there something else at play here? Jack didn't know, but what he did know was that the girl he was protecting was the key to it all. Whatever danger they faced, she was somehow at the center of it. "What's your name?" Jack asked, his voice breaking the silence for the first time in what felt like hours. He was speaking to her as if she could provide the answers to everything, but in truth, he had no idea who or what she really was. She looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his in a way that felt oddly reassuring. "I don't have a name," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "At least, not one you can understand." Jack furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" The girl looked down, her fingers tracing a faint scar on her wrist. "Where I come from, names are not like yours. They are different, but they are not important. Not now." Jack didn't know what to make of that, but he didn't press further. There were bigger concerns, and the answers would come in time, if they survived long enough to get them. Suddenly, a distant noise shattered the stillness, the unmistakable hum of something mechanical, a low, buzzing sound that made Jack's stomach tighten. His hand flew to his gun instinctively, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. The girl's eyes widened, and she took a cautious step toward him, her gaze darting toward the source of the sound. Jack could hear it more clearly now. Something was approaching, something big. He motioned for the girl to stay back as he peeked through the cracked door, his heart pounding in his chest. Out in the distance, a faint light flickered from behind a cluster of buildings. It was moving fast, faster than any vehicle Jack had ever seen. And then, the sound of something larger, much larger, was heard. A roar. It shook the ground beneath their feet, and Jack's grip on his weapon tightened. Whatever it wasn't friendly. The time for hiding was over. "We need to move. Now," Jack whispered urgently to the girl. Without hesitation, she nodded. Jack's mind raced as they prepared to leave their temporary shelter. Whatever force was coming for them was no longer a distant threat. It was here. And Jack would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant facing whatever horrors the universe had thrown at them. As they moved toward the exit, Jack felt a new kind of urgency. The stakes were higher now. The world outside had turned against them, and there was no turning back. The moment they stepped outside, the night seemed to close in around them. The once bustling city now felt like a dark maze, its streets empty, its buildings broken and silent. The hum of the machines in the distance grew louder, their ominous presence sending shivers down Jack's spine. The girl moved beside him, every step she took more cautious than the last. Her face, usually so serene, was now filled with a quiet determination, a reflection of the world they now lived in. Jack kept his eyes on the street ahead, his heart hammering in his chest. Whatever was chasing them wasn't far behind. He could feel it. The air seemed charged, as if something unseen was closing in on them from all directions. Every shadow felt like a potential danger, every sound a possible threat. But they couldn't stop now. "Stay close," Jack murmured, his voice low and urgent. "Don't make a sound." The girl nodded, her steps light and almost inaudible as they moved through the darkened streets. Jack's hand was firmly gripping his weapon, his senses on high alert. The hunt had begun, and he wasn't about to let them be the prey. They took another sharp turn down an alley, hoping to lose their pursuers in the maze of abandoned buildings. But the night was still too quiet, and the tension in the air grew thicker with every passing second. Jack's breath quickened, and he could feel the weight of their situation pressing on him. They couldn't run forever, and they couldn't hide indefinitely. The only thing they could do was survive. The girl glanced up at him, her eyes wide. "Where are we going?" "I don't know," Jack replied honestly. "Anywhere but here." They kept moving, every footstep echoing off the cracked pavement. Jack kept his eyes on the street ahead, but he could sense the girl's unease. She had been quiet for too long. The silence was heavy, and he could feel her fear creeping through the air like a virus. She wasn't used to this. This world, this danger. Jack could tell she was trying to understand, trying to keep up with the whirlwind of chaos that had suddenly become her reality. "We'll figure it out," Jack said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. They reached an intersection, and Jack paused. The streets ahead were blocked by rubble, and he knew they couldn't go in that direction. But just as he was about to change course, a low growl reached his ears, a mechanical sound, unnatural and menacing. His stomach dropped. He didn't need to look to know what it was. He could feel the presence of the machines, the things that had been tracking them, getting closer. "Go," Jack snapped, pulling the girl with him as they sprinted down a narrow street. The girl stumbled behind him, but Jack didn't slow down. The sound of the machine's engines grew louder, and Jack's breath quickened. They were closing in, and fast. There was nowhere to hide anymore, no shelter to keep them safe. They were on their own, and every second counted. He turned another corner, barely avoiding a large piece of debris that had fallen from the nearby building. He pushed forward, forcing his legs to move faster, the girl struggling to keep pace behind him. Jack's mind raced as they ran. They needed to find a place to hide, a way to lose the machines, but with every step, the feeling of being hunted only grew stronger. The sound of the machine's engines roared behind them, growing louder by the second. Jack didn't dare look back. He could feel them closing in, their presence like a looming shadow that stretched across the streets. The girl was still with him, but her breathing had become more labored, her footsteps faltering. He could see the strain on her face, the fear, the exhaustion. She wasn't used to this, not in the way he was. Jack knew that, and he felt a surge of guilt rise within him. He had promised to protect her, but as the machines drew closer, he wondered if he was making the right choice. "Keep going," Jack urged, his voice tight with desperation. They rounded another corner, but the street ahead was blocked. There was no way through, No escape. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he skidded to a halt. The machines were right behind them, and he could hear the sound of their engines growling as they neared. He didn't know how much time they had, but he knew they had to act now. "Get inside," Jack shouted, pointing toward an abandoned building up ahead. There was no time to think. It was their only chance. The girl nodded, her face pale but determined. They both sprinted toward the building, Jack's pulse racing as the machines drew nearer. He heard the faint whir of the machine's engines, and his mind raced with possibilities. They had to get inside, had to find a way to make it through. But the machines weren't going to let them go so easily. Jack had no illusions. They were more than just a threat. They were a force of nature, designed for one purpose: to hunt, to kill. Jack slammed into the door of the building, forcing it open with a grunt. The girl followed closely behind, and Jack quickly shut the door behind them. The building was dark and empty, its once pristine walls now covered in dust and decay. But there was no time to appreciate the silence. They had to keep moving, had to find somewhere to hide. "Stay close," Jack said, his voice low as he led the girl deeper into the building. "We can't let them find us." The girl nodded, her eyes darting around nervously. Jack felt her fear, but he had no time to comfort her. The machines would be here soon. They had to act fast. They reached the staircase at the far end of the building, and Jack motioned for the girl to follow him. They would go up, higher than the machines could reach, at least for now. It wasn't much, but it was the best chance they had. As they ascended the stairs, Jack could feel his muscles aching, his body screaming for rest. But there was no time for that. They had to survive, had to keep moving. The machines were out there, hunting them, and they wouldn't stop until they had their prey. With every step, the walls of the building seemed to close in, but Jack didn't allow himself to think about it. He had one goal: protect the girl. The rest could wait. At the top of the stairs, Jack found a small room with a window that overlooked the street below. He peered through the glass, and the sight that met his eyes made his heart drop. The machines were everywhere, circling the building, waiting for them to make a mistake. They were trapped. But Jack didn't give up. Not yet. He could feel the girl's presence beside him, her silent determination pushing him forward. He would find a way out. He had to, because no matter what, he wouldn't let them become prey. The room at the top of the building was small, the dust thick in the air, but it offered one thing: an opportunity. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears like the ticking of a clock. He stood at the window, watching the machines below with grim determination. They were waiting, their engines humming softly in the distance, a haunting reminder of the fate that awaited them if they didn't act quickly. The girl was standing a few feet behind him, her breath shallow, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was exhausted, just like him, but there was something else in her eyes now, something that Jack hadn't seen before. It was the same fire he'd seen in the eyes of warriors who had fought until the very end, a spark of defiance that could not be extinguished. "You're thinking about fighting them, aren't you?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Jack turned to face her, meeting her gaze. There was no point in lying. He knew the machines were too powerful, too relentless for them to outrun or outmaneuver. The only choice they had now was to face them head-on. "We don't have much choice," Jack replied. "They'll tear this place apart if we don't make a stand. We have to fight, or we won't make it out." The girl nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "Then let's do it. Together." Jack's heart swelled with pride. This girl, who had once been so terrified, was now standing with him as an equal ready to fight for survival. He couldn't let her down. Not now. Not ever. He scanned the room, looking for anything they could use as weapons or tools. There was a metal table in the corner, a few broken chairs scattered around, and a pile of debris near the door. But nothing useful, nothing that could make a real difference against the machines. "We'll have to improvise," Jack said, grabbing a long metal pipe from the pile of debris. It was heavy and solid, the kind of weapon that could deal some damage if used right. "Take anything you can find. We'll make it work." The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded, moving to the other side of the room to search for something she could use. Jack could see the fear still lingering in her eyes, but it was buried beneath that same fire, the same spark of determination that refused to die. Outside, the machines were drawing closer. Jack could hear the low rumble of their engines, feel the vibrations through the building's walls. It wouldn't be long before they broke through. He had to act fast. He grabbed a few more pieces of debris, quickly fashioning them into makeshift weapons. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind racing. He had to find a way to turn the tables, to make sure the machines knew they weren't going down without a fight. "Are you ready?" Jack asked, turning to the girl. She was holding a large, jagged piece of metal, her face set in a determined expression. "I am." Jack nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Good. We fight until the end." The sound of the machine's engines grew louder, and Jack's senses were on high alert. He could hear their footsteps now, the clanking of their armored legs as they moved through the building, searching for them. Jack tightened his grip on the pipe, ready for whatever came next. The door to the room rattled as something heavy slammed into it from the other side. Jack's heart skipped a beat, and he knew the machines were almost there. There was no time to second-guess. He had to make sure they were ready. "We hold our ground," Jack said, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of the situation. "No matter what happens, we don't back down." The girl nodded, her face pale but resolute. They both took their positions, Jack standing near the window, the girl close to the door, ready to strike at a moment's notice. The room was silent, except for the sound of their breathing and the distant rumble of the machines approaching. Then the door burst open, and the first machine stepped into the room. It was a towering behemoth, its metal body gleaming in the dim light. Its eyes glowed red, scanning the room for any sign of movement. Jack's grip tightened on the pipe as he prepared to strike, his body tense and ready. The machine's movements were slow, calculated, as it scanned the room, its sensors picking up every detail. The girl's eyes locked on the machine, and for a moment, Jack could see the fear in her expression, but it was quickly replaced by the same fierce determination he had seen before. "Now," Jack shouted, charging at the machine with everything he had. The girl was right behind him, her makeshift weapon raised, ready to strike. The machine reacted instantly, its massive arm swinging toward Jack in a brutal arc. But Jack was quicker. He ducked under the swing, rolling to the side just in time to avoid the crushing blow. The girl took her chance, slashing at the machine's leg with her jagged piece of metal. The blade scraped across its armor, leaving a small but noticeable scratch. The machine let out a mechanical growl, its sensors whirring as it adjusted to their movements. Jack knew they wouldn't be able to take it down like this. They needed to be smarter, faster. Every second counted. The second machine entered the room, and Jack's heart sank. They were outnumbered. There was no way they could keep this up. But he wouldn't give up. Not now. Not when they were so close to the end. The two machines began to move in on them, their heavy feet shaking the ground beneath them. Jack gritted his teeth, stepping forward, raising his weapon. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. "Stay with me," Jack shouted, looking at the girl. She nodded, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Jack felt a spark of hope. They could do this. They had to. Together, they would make their stand. The air was thick with tension as Jack and the girl fought with everything they had. Their bodies were bruised, their muscles aching, but neither of them faltered. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were fighting for something much bigger now. The world outside the building, the future of their people, depended on their strength and determination. The machines that had once seemed unstoppable were now up against the one thing they couldn't calculate: human willpower. Jack swung the metal pipe with all his might, landing a solid blow to the first machine's arm. The machine staggered back, its movements faltering for a split second. That was all Jack needed. He followed up with another strike, this one to the machine's head. Sparks flew from the impact, and for a moment, the machine froze, its systems glitching. "Now," Jack yelled, nodding toward the girl. She rushed forward, her weapon raised high. She struck the machine's leg, hitting a weak spot where the armor was thinner. The metal gave way with a loud, grinding noise, and the machine stumbled, its leg collapsing beneath it. The machine let out a screech, its systems struggling to maintain balance. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed the machine's arm, using it as leverage to pull himself up. With a burst of adrenaline, he swung the pipe again, slamming it into the machine's exposed core. The machine's eyes flickered one last time before it crumpled to the ground, its body going limp. "Get the other one," Jack shouted, but he was already turning his attention to the second machine. The second machine, though slower and less agile, was still a formidable opponent. It lumbered toward them, its heavy steps shaking the floor beneath them. Jack could hear its heavy breathing, the mechanical hum of its processors as it analyzed the situation. The girl stood her ground, her eyes focused on the approaching threat. "We can do this," Jack said under his breath, trying to steady his nerves. The machine was almost upon them now. Jack grabbed a jagged piece of debris and hurled it at the machine's face. The debris hit its sensor panel, causing the machine to reel back in surprise. The girl didn't waste a second. She lunged forward, aiming for the machine's vulnerable neck joint. The machine reacted quickly, its massive arms swinging toward her in a wide arc. But the girl was ready. She dodged the strike, her body twisting out of the way with surprising agility. She spun around, slashing at the machine's exposed side, the blade cutting deep into its armor. Jack didn't wait for the machine to retaliate. He charged, using the distraction to his advantage. He swung the metal pipe with all his strength, aiming for the machine's power core. The pipe slammed into the machine's chest with a deafening crash, and the machine staggered back, its systems sparking and malfunctioning. The machine let out an angry roar as it tried to fight back, but Jack was relentless. He struck again and again, each blow weakening the machine further. The girl continued to circle around the machine, attacking from every angle. Together, they were a force the machine had never anticipated. Finally, with one last decisive blow, Jack pierced the machine's power core. The machine let out a final, dying screech before collapsing to the ground in a heap of twisted metal and sparks. The room fell silent, save for the sound of their labored breathing. Jack stood over the wreckage of the two machines, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. His muscles screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. They had done it. Against all odds, they had defeated the machines. The girl stood beside him, her breathing shallow but steady. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't quite process what had just happened. But there was something else in her eyes now, something stronger than the fear that had once held her back. Respect. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack nodded, a tired smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, we did." For a long moment, they stood there in the ruined room, taking in the victory they had just earned. The machines were defeated, but the battle was far from over. They had won this fight, but the war was still raging outside. "We need to keep moving," Jack said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily on him. "This place won't be safe for long." The girl nodded, her resolve hardening. "Where do we go from here?" Jack looked out the window, his gaze focused on the horizon. There was a city in the distance, a symbol of what they could still fight for. It wasn't much, but it was something. He knew it was a long shot, but it was their only shot. "We head for the city," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We fight for the future, for humanity." With one last look at the wreckage of the machines, Jack turned and began to walk toward the door. The girl followed closely behind him, her steps firm and purposeful. They had fought back the machines, but they were far from finished. The universe had underestimated humanity once again. It wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would fight for their place in a universe that had dared to challenge them. The tide had turned, and now humanity would rise. The night was quiet, a rare calm after the chaos. The wind had begun to pick up again, rustling the trees and carrying the faint scent of the earth. Jack and the girl had made their way through the ruined streets, their exhaustion palpable, but the fire in their hearts still burned brightly. They were survivors, and they had learned that no force, no matter how advanced, could break them. They had become something more, something unstoppable. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the glowing lights on the horizon seemed like a distant promise. They didn't know exactly what awaited them there, but they knew it was a place where they could begin anew. Their fight had only just begun, but they had already proven something crucial. The universe had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, to adapt, to survive. "We made it this far," Jack said, his voice low but full of resolve. "We've fought our way through the worst of it." The girl nodded, her face solemn but determined. The terror of the last few days still lingered, but it had changed her. The fear that had once consumed her was now replaced with a quiet strength. She had found her place beside Jack, not as someone who needed protection, but as an equal. They had become a team, an unstoppable force, and they knew they could face whatever challenges the universe threw their way. They continued walking in silence, the city growing closer with every step. It wasn't the home they had known before the invasion. The streets were cracked, buildings reduced to rubble, and signs of destruction were everywhere. Yet amidst the ruins, there was life. People had gathered, survivors like them, who had fought their own battles, and now they were rebuilding. As they entered the city, they were met with wary eyes. But those eyes soon softened. Word had spread quickly about the two who had defeated the machines, the invincible warriors. There was a quiet reverence in the air, and Jack could feel it. People didn't just see them as survivors, they saw them as symbols of hope. They were the proof that the universe's mighty forces could be toppled. They were the evidence that humanity would never be broken. One of the survivors, a grizzled man in his late 50s, approached them. His face was weathered, but his eyes held a spark of something familiar: determination. "You two the ones who took down those machines?" he asked, his voice rough but full of curiosity. Jack gave a small, tired nod. "We did." The man let out a low whistle. "I heard about you. The whole city's been talking. You've got more than just courage. You've got the spirit of humanity on your side." Jack looked around, seeing the faces of those who had survived, the people who still held on despite the odds. The girl stood beside him, her expression unreadable, but Jack knew that she felt the same. They had not only fought for their lives, but for the survival of everyone who had been left behind. "We're here to help," Jack said, his voice steady and confident. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for everyone who's still out there. For humanity." The man studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "Then welcome. We'll need all the help we can get." They were led deeper into the city, and Jack couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm wash over him. The chaos of the past weeks was still fresh in his mind, but for the first time, he felt like they were on the right path. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were leaders, and their fight had just become a movement. As they walked further into the heart of the city, the girl finally spoke, her voice soft, but carrying a weight of certainty. "We've lost so much, but we've also gained something." Jack looked at her, seeing the quiet strength in her eyes. "Yeah," he replied. "We've gained each other, and we've gained the belief that we can turn this around. It's not over, not by a long shot." The sky above them began to shift, the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness. The city, though scared and battered, was starting to come alive. People were working together, rebuilding, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was hope. The universe had tested humanity, and now, humanity would show the universe what it truly meant to survive. Jack and the girl had proven that no matter how powerful the enemy, no matter how dire the situation, humanity's spirit could never be crushed. They had won their first battle, but the war was far from over. And this time, humanity was no longer the prey. It was the predator. Together, they would rise, not just to survive, but to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The scars they carried were not just marks of pain. They were symbols of their victory, their power, and the unstoppable force they had become. With the dawn of a new day, Jack and the girl stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. The universe had been warned, and humanity, for the first time in a long while, was ready to fight back.